Hi and welcome back to my channel. I'm Simon and today I am back with a huge reading wrap up because I have not done a wrap up since January. I know, we're going to rectify that because at some point very soon I would like to do my books of the year so far, and before that I wanted to go through all the books that I've read, have a catch up with you about them. In fact, I'm just going to show you a picture of how many books I have read since January, and I wonder if you can tell from what has basically become a book graph which month I A, read the Women's Prize for Fiction long list, B, which month I read both the shortlist for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction and the International Booker Prize. I wonder, which could they be? But anyway, let's head to the books that I read in February. I didn't read so much in February. I started the year with a real bang. I will link my January reading wrap up below. I think I read about 13, 14, 15 maybe books. I wonder if that real sort of rush of reading and that excitement at the start of the year meant that in February I was like, oh, I just need a little bit of a breather. But anyway, and the first book that I read in February was Bellis by Nicola Dan, which I'd meant to read for ages. Well, frankly, since before it came out when I got a proof. This is about Tom and Ming who meet at university and fall in love, and we follow the relationship as it builds, and we meet their friends and how they bring their friends together. And then Ming announces that they want to transition. And I loved the way this looked at what that means for Ming, for all the people around them, and what it means for Ming's relationship with Tom, and how, I don't want to give any spoilers, but I just thought all of that was done so brilliantly. The other thing that I really loved about this book was the way it looked at culture and the way it looked at Ming being from Malaysia and living in the UK, and how cultures come together, but also how being trans in that culture is compared to how it is in the UK. I just thought that was all done really phenomenally, as well as just really loving these characters who, through love in all of its different shapes and forms, be it friendship, be it lust, be it, relationships, the way it looked at how love can do the best, the worst, all those different things, I thought was absolutely fantastically done. Really enjoyed it. There's some amazing food writing in here. I was hungry quite a lot throughout. Anyway, really loved this. Hi, Editing Simon here, just trying to see how many different costume changes he can get in one video of the bookish Lady Gaga. To quickly say that after saying how much I love Bellis and how excited I was for Nicola Dan's second novel, I then went on an absolute random tangent about how excited I was about Anna Bailey's second novel after absolutely loving reading this, which was my second book of February. It opens when we meet Emma, who is saying goodbye to her friend Abby at a party, and Abby then goes missing, and after that we follow the responses from people and the suspicions of people throughout this small American town, a town that in many ways has quite a few characters that are quite backward, as well as some very forward-thinking characters too. I thought the way Anna Bailey balanced that was really well done. And I really grew to care about all the characters involved, even the ones that I kind of didn't love to hate, but certainly really didn't like. I didn't agree with their motives, but Anna Bailey again does this really...
It's a really... How do I word this?
When an author can get you to understand why people who have polar opposite opinions to you might have those opinions and what has made them that way, I think it's really powerful, and she does that brilliantly. This book is incredibly shocking in parts, really uncomfortable to read and quite confronting, but at the same time, like I said, has this mystery that propels you forward, as do all the backstories of the people that we meet after the night that Abby goes missing, including Abby herself. As it builds slowly but surely to its denouement, I just thought it was, brilliant. And it has a queerness to it that I thought was brilliantly done too. Then I headed to some poetry. This is the first collection that Fitzcarraldo published. They're now doing poetry, and they're doing it with white with a blue rectangle inside. This is Strange Beach by Oluwansian Olayiwola, and this collection I thought was really powerful. It has this watery nature to it, at the same time as this really brilliant queerness. It's in some ways incredibly tender. It's not a collection that for me had really specific themes, and I have to say I always feel very nervous talking about poetry because it is not my forte, but queer poetry is definitely where it's at for me and is how I'm getting into more and more poetry, although I haven't read enough of it this year. Definitely want to head to some more queer poetry collections, so if you've read any recently that you've loved, let me know in the comments down below. But yeah, I thought this was great, and we'll definitely check out more of Fitzcarraldo's poetry collections. On to another queer tale, and that is Cinema Love by Jia-Ming Tang. This is about, or opens with a couple who are living in New York City, and it's Old Second and Bao Mei, and they've created this very much hand-to-mouth existence in New York after having left the small town of, I'm going to get this right, Fuzhou, which is a rural town in China, where they used to go to the workers' cinema. And the workers' cinema was indeed a cinema, but it was also a place where closeted gay men would go to meet. And so we get the backstory of their time there and relationships that were built there, and then we head to the present and where those relationships are now and how some characters come together and some characters, well, yeah, no more spoilers. Again, I thought this was fantastically done. I found it really emotional. I do find hearing about what it's like to be queer, the good and the bad in other cultures, it's something that I feel I need to know more about, and I love books that introduce all of that to me, no matter how uncomfortable, upsetting, etc. it might be. And I did find this a really emotional read and a great read, and I look forward to whatever Jia-Ming Tang writes next. I will look forward to it very much indeed. And then penultimately in February, I read an absolute corker. Now this was after, I think I must have just had a hangover from all those good books. And from apparently the 14th to the 24th of February, I didn't pick anything up. That's not technically true. I kept picking books up. Having a bit of time, I was like, oh, I think I might like this. I'm not sure if I like this or not. I just didn't read anything to fruition or even for more than a few chapters for quite a while, and that doesn't happen to me that often, but I'm also a great believer that when it does, you just have to let it do its thing. So I did. But what I thought would be good would be for me to get to another thriller, having loved Tall Bones so much. And so I finally picked up Long Bright River by Liz Moore. This also, I should say, was partly because the TV show, I'd seen trailers for it. Also, my lovely friend Julie was working on the book in the US and was like, oh, let's buddy read this together. Well, I just raced on, and I'm so sorry, Julie, but I could not stop reading this book. This is about a policewoman called Mickey who is working the streets of Philadelphia, and there have been a few bodies recently discovered where it looks like they have overdosed because there's a real problem with drugs in Philadelphia. But Mickey thinks that these deaths could be something more suspicious than a drug overdose, and she also has a vested interest in the women that keep vanishing due to drugs or keep disappearing for certain amounts of time because her sister has become an addict. If I say she hasn't seen her sister for a while, I don't think that gives too much away. I knew that from the outset, and I was absolutely gripped by this. Liz Moore knows how to spill a yarn. She knows how to give you twists and turns that you do not see coming, whilst also writing really complex, beautifully flawed characters that you love and you want the best for, but also get so cross with as you're reading them. Like, you really, really care about these characters in all spectrum of caringness, if that is even a term. It's not, but let's run with it. I absolutely love this, and part of me is kicking myself that I hadn't read it sooner. I bought this, you can see, from the Strand when I was in New York back in 2020. I'm so keen to head to The God in the Woods, Liz Moore's latest novel, possibly later this summer, maybe when summer is on the cusp of autumn. I think that could be just the perfect book for that. But yeah, thought this was absolutely phenomenal and want to read everything that Liz Moore has read now. The last book that I read in February was the...
Well, I was going to say it was the first book of the Women's Prize for Fiction long list that I read. Not true, it was the first of the books on the Women's Prize for Fiction long list that I hadn't read yet. And then I went on to read all I hadn't read yet.
And so I'm going to be super duper speedy talking about this. And then when I film Marches, because I'm filming them separately at different points, just to give myself a bit of a breather, frankly. The first one that I read was Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell, which so many people had recommended to me. And I have to say, I really enjoyed this book. This is all about Kira, who is in a very difficult marriage, to put it mildly. And when we meet her, something really unsettling has happened, and soon she leaves, and we follow her as her and her children end up living in a hotel, something I didn't know anything about, and how the system works against her, essentially. And you become really attached to her and her kids, and you want the best for them. I thought it was wonderfully written. There is a bit of a knight in shining armour scenario that I didn't really love, that I found was a little bit, well, I kind of saw it coming and found it, I don't know, it took something away from me. I felt like we didn't need that saviour storyline. And it is a bit complex, and I won't say any more because I don't want to give anything away, but also because I have talked about this book. I thought this was brilliantly written. It didn't make my personal shortlist because of that knight in shining armour element, but I will definitely be reading whatever Roisin O'Donnell writes next. So there we are. That was February. I will be back with March, well, just like that. There we go. Now on to the books that I read in March. I'm going to start off with 6 of the Women's Prize long list. Hi everyone, it's Editing Simon interrupting myself because I spent too long talking about all of the Women's Prize for Fiction long listed books, when actually I've made several vlogs and indeed a ranking of... Did I do a ranking? No, I didn't do a ranking. I did which books I would put in my own personal shortlist. So I'm going to go through these super duper quick, and I will link all 5 of those videos down below if you want to know more. So first up, in March, I read Crooked Seeds by Karen Jennings. This is about Deirdre, who's a woman living in South Africa on the, well, below the breadline, frankly, and she's getting called by the police because the house she used to live in, there are bones that have been discovered. What does she know about it? This is gritty, unsettling, confronting in a lot of ways, and yeah, I really want to read An Island by Karen Jennings, which I haven't read, so we have that. Next up, I read All Fours by Miranda July, about a woman who one day, instead of flying to New York for an event, she decides to drive, but she doesn't drive very far, ends up in a motel room, which she does up as her own home, and has a sort of, well, frisson with a younger man. This was bonkers, quirky, enjoyable overall. There are a few points where I felt like it went a little bit too far for me personally, but really glad I read it. Very intrigued to go back and read more of Miranda July's writing. The Artist by Lucy Steed was the next book I read in March, and this was such a delightful surprise to me because I don't tend to like books about art. This is very much about art, as we meet Joseph, who goes to stay with Eduardo Tartuffe, an artist in Provence in the 1920s, and he thinks he's been invited there. However, we find out it was actually the artist's niece who is also there, and a frisson starts between them, but we know from the beginning of the book something quite awful is going to happen. I really enjoyed this. I thought the writing was gorgeous. The art really came to life. It's a sumptuous book. Can't wait for whatever Lucy writes next. A Little Trickery followed that, and this is another absolute corker by Rosanna Pike, who, again, I can't wait to see what she writes next. We follow Tib, who is one of my favourite characters in fiction. Now, I mentioned her in my mid-year book freakout tag. We follow her in rural Tudor England as she has to kind of fend for herself after she's been orphaned, different people that she meets, the different scrapes she gets into, and a big something else that, well, I can't give anything else away. But yeah, absolutely loved this, and her voice just phenomenal. And then we had Fundamentally, which is a book about, by Nusaiba Yunus. That was the next book that I read in March off the list. And this is about Nadia, who is a woman who goes to help de-radicalise ISIS brides. This is a comic novel, which I know has really kind of caused a bit of controversy. I thought in general it was brilliantly done. The last third for me went a little bit too far. I felt the jokes were being pushed too much, and then also it got a bit overly melodramatic and silly, I want to say. And that was a shame because the first 2/3 were really strong, we'll definitely read whatever Newsaber writes next. And then the next book I read off the list was Birding by Rose Ruin, set in a small seaside town where we meet two different women, Lydia, who was a former pop star, and Joyce, who is living with her mum, and they have quite a strange relationship. It is Joyce, isn't it? Yeah, it is Joyce. This I enjoyed. However, Joyce's story was way more interesting and gripping to me, although there is a scene with Lydia involving a miniature golf course that I will never ever forget. Definitely want to read Rose's debut. I loved the faded glamour of this book. I thought it was a perfect seaside novel. So there we are, there's those. Now on to 3 books that I read between the rest of the long list that I hadn't read. I did do an event in March with not 1, not 2, but 3 authors where I had to read these 3 books. First up, we have The Queen of Fives by Alex Hay. I read Alex's debut, The Housekeepers, and absolutely loved it. It is a kind of heist novel and with real Downton Abbey vibes because it's very much upstairs, downstairs, and yeah, I really, really loved that. It was a real romp, as is The Queen of Fives, his second novel, which is about, and I'm going to get her name wrong if I don't look it up, Quinn LeBlanc, who in 1898 has got to pull off the biggest con of her career, and she is a renowned con woman, although also a mistress of disguise, because nobody really knows who she is, but she has become infamous throughout London. And this big con that she is, well, setting herself to pull is to, well, quite literally pull the Duke and marry him. And she has 5 days to do it, and we follow her along the way. And there's lots of card tricks in here, just loads of different trickery. This was delicious. I ate this up. I was completely hooked by it and captivated and ready for the rompy ride that it was. Absolutely brilliant. The second author on the panel was Amelia Hart, and this is her second novel, The Sirens. I very much enjoyed her debut, Wayward, which is a witchy tale that I would say is quite a slow burn, and this is a slow burn as well. What I think Amelia Hart is really good at doing is slowly but surely leading you in along a certain direction, and slowly but surely tightening her hand on yours as she drags you that way. This is about Lucy, who is escaping from something that she's done. She goes to find her sister Jess, who she thinks will help her, and when she gets to Jess's house, it's empty and her sister has vanished. And so she's on her own in this small town where there's lots of rumours of men disappearing on the beach, disappearing at sea. And well, you might be able to guess from the cover, it's got a mermaid vibe going, but also what it has is another tale of 2 sisters centuries before, and I will say no more. But yeah, very much enjoyed this, and Amelia Hart is always an absolute joy to talk to. And then last of the, I was going to say tantalising trio, well, just fabulous trio, was Laura Jones, and this is The Woman in the Wallpaper. And if you are looking for a good chunky, I'm going to say it is a romp, although it deals with some really hard historical moments. This is set in, I want to say 1798, I was wrong. It's 1789 in Paris, where we head to the Auberst factory, which is a factory for wallpaper, which is run, or was run, by Madame Auberst, who has recently died under dubious circumstances, shall we say. We meet 2 sisters who go and work in the factory, and also meet Madame Auberst's daughter-in-law, Hortense, and it's how these women all come into each other's lives, and the story from there, but also I'm not going to give any more away from that other than to say I found this really brilliantly written. Again, absolutely ate it up, and the fact that I read these 3 over a long weekend, yeah, if you're looking for some corking historical fiction, you've got these. Will any of these make it into my best books of the year? You'll have to wait a week to find out. Back to The rest of the Women's Prize, oh actually, and two others. Editing Simon is back to do a quick fire of the final books from the Women's Prize longlist that I had not read. So next I read Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. This is kind of a culmination of all of her previous books featuring Lucy Barton, Olive Kittredge, Bob Burgess. I hadn't read their, and Isabel. I hadn't read their stories before. I'm now desperate to go back. It's a perfect diving off book too if you haven't read some of them or all of them. The writing was stunning. There's a murder mystery going on in the background and I thought that was dealt with really, really well. I think she is a master of writing, just so subtle and not a word wasted. This was ace. I really, really love this and can't wait to go and find out more about Olive, Isabel and Bob's stories when I head back to all of their books. I've read all the Lucy ones. Then DNF, Somewhere Else by Jenny Daicheese. I just found this really, really badly written. It was really overly written, it was repetitive, and yeah, I just didn't get into it, so I gave up quite early. Ooh. Then we have The Dream Hotel by Layla Lalami, and this for me was a big hit. One, it reminded me how much I love speculative fiction because it's about a woman called Sarah who, coming back into the United States, she stopped because there is this AI system that can, well, supposedly can tell if you're going to do something bad and it alerts the authorities, and so she ends up in the Dream Hotel, which is an institute along with lots of other women, some of whom we get to know. We follow her story in there, we follow her husband outside, and things just get really tricky and twisty, and I can't wait to read everything Layla Lalami has written before this. I really, really, really thought this was great. And also it has sent me to some more speculative fiction since, and I will definitely be reading more in the future. So that's exciting. The blind is banging in the breeze and it's really annoying me. I hope you can't hear that. Then I read Good Girl by Aria Abba. This is about a young woman who is dealing with grief. She's also dealing with the fact that she feels very much an outsider in Berlin. Her parents were immigrants, her mother has died, and so she throws herself into drugs and sex and a dreadful relationship with an American man. Also looks at art. I thought the writing was brilliant. There is also a really moment in this, but I have to say it has faded quite a bit for me since. But still, we'll definitely head to whatever Aria writes next. Penultimately from the Women's Prize long-listed books that I hadn't read before, I read next Amma by Saray De Silva. This is a multi-generational novel. I've sorted out the flapping blind. It's no longer annoying me. Back to Amma, which starts in pretty much the present day, where we meet Annie, who's come over to the UK from New Zealand to meet a man she feels like she knows really well, but she's never met before. Who is he? Ooh, mysterious. We then skip back to 1950s in Singapore, where we meet her great-grandmother when she's a child, and something dreadful happens that the effects of ripple through the generations back, well, all the way to Annie, and we get this sort of patchwork of different time periods. I thought this was beautifully done. It's some very difficult subject matter. This is not for the faint of heart in parts, but what a payoff, what an incredible debut. We'll definitely read whatever she writes next too. And last but not least, though not the last book that I read in March, was The Persians by Sanam Malouji, and this is another multi-generational tale about 5 women all in the same family, some of whom have moved from Iran to America to make a new life after what goes on there, which you learn throughout the book, and I didn't know. It's a bit of history I didn't know much about, and found that insight incredible. Then we also have 2 characters who stay behind. We follow their different narratives. I will say I felt like it was maybe 1 or 2 narratives too many. I loved Elizabeth the Matriarch's story and would have loved a whole novel about her, but I still very much enjoyed the book overall. Just, yeah, maybe a little bit too noisy and crazy and chaotic in parts, but I kind of like that too, which sounds odd, but it's the truth. So there we are. Those are all the Women's Prize long-listed books that I read in March. Back to the final 2 books that I read in March, over to me then. First of which is Troll by Johanna Sinisalo. Sorry, it's really hard to read that text, especially sideways. This is translated, I should say, by Herbert Lomas. And I kept seeing this in bookshops all through March and was getting more and more intrigued, especially because it's about a man called Angel, a photographer called Angel, who one day he's walking home and he sees a group of men attacking a troll. Now this is no surprise to him. People know about trolls, they've heard about them, but he decides to rescue this troll. So he takes the troll home And as the troll stays, Angel is magnetised towards him, and it's how that has an effect on all elements of his life and other relationships within his life, and is that's how I describe it. This to me was a bit of a disappointment overall. I really liked what it was looking at in terms of the animalistic nature of things. I should say throughout it there, you know, we get the story of Angel and this troll, but we also get lots of, they're sort of shown as non-fiction pieces about trolls and the history of trolls and all the folklore around trolls, because Angel is trying to work out, you know, how to sort of look after this creature. Sometimes it felt a bit too academic, but yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was something very, very different, but I was hoping it would be a favourite, and it wasn't, because yeah, the academicness of it overtook the fairy tale, and I wanted more of the queer fairy tale. And then last but not least, in March, blimey, we've got there, still 3 more months to go, Deborah Levy's The Position of Spoons and Other Intimacies. I love Deborah Levy, and I enjoyed this. However, this is a series of essays about artists, creatives, clothes, lemons, and things that Deborah Levy loves. Some of them are so short, and I loved the condensed nature of that. I'm thinking of one about Mona Lisa particularly. I should say I loved when she wrote about lemons. I would have liked a lot more of that, but because I didn't always know about who she was writing about, I didn't always sort of care. And so whilst it was still great and I'm still a big Levy fan, wasn't my favourite, but wasn't awful either. Right, there we have March. Now we need to head to April and less books. We're back in Stripes for April, which was a quieter reading month, which is probably recovery after the month before. Although it would be interesting to see over the next 6 months if I do have a habit of reading loads and not a lot, then loads and not a lot. I don't have any prizes, well maybe I do, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway, so first book I read in April was After You'd Gone by Maggie O'Farrell, which was 25 years old this year, and I absolutely loved this. I thought it was incredible. We meet Alice, who decides one day to take the train from London to Scotland to go and see her family. And at Edinburgh station, she meets her sisters, goes to the toilets and sees something so shocking. She gets on a train back, and when she gets back to London, she walks in front of traffic and then ends up in a coma. And we get flashbacks of her in a coma, but also stories about her through members of her family who come and see her and their histories. And it all, I can't say more other than the writing is absolutely stunning. There were loads of different sentences that I was like wanting to underline, although I don't underline books, but if I did, this would have scrawl all over it, because yeah, there's one point where she talks about a map and how when it's moved, it makes different countries kiss, and just little moments like that. Oh, stunning. Absolutely stunning. Then I headed to Human Nature by Jane Rawson, which Jane very kindly sent me as a birthday present of sorts. Jane is an author who I have become a huge fan of. She is published in Australia. It's quite hard to get her books over here, apart from The Wreck, which was a book I read years ago. Absolutely loved. This is non-fiction, and it isn't quite what I was expecting. From what I'd heard about it in the blurb, it sounded like this was a book about Jane, who has moved from the city to more rural Tasmania, and her dealing with nature as that comes much closer to her, and as someone who isn't a massive fan of the wilderness, although she loves nature and the planet and the environment. And what this actually is a little bit of that, but a lot more about what we are doing to the planet and the environment, and human versus nature, but also human nature and where humans and nature come together and how we can better things. I thought this was great. Big brain energy, had to take quite a lot of pauses, but really overall enjoyed it. Then this book bowled me over. I was hoping that it would be good, and it was super duper good. But I was a little bit nervous because it's by Bob the Drag Queen, who is a former RuPaul's Drag Race winner. And there was a little bit that was like, okay, this is a celebrity writing a novel. This could go either way. It didn't go the way I was slightly nervous it would, because this is just, have I already said this? Possibly. Incredible. Set in sort of now, but people who have died in the past are just reappearing, random people, and one of those people is Harriet Tubman, along with 4 or 5 of the enslaved people that she saved as part of the Underground Railroad. I didn't know anything about her, shamefully. I now have learnt more and have gone on to learn even more. And what Bob the Drag Queen does with this is so brilliant is she decides she wants to make a rap album. And so a producer is called in and we get to know his story and his situation as a queer black man in America now. And the way the past and the present riff off each other, the way there's sort of this tension between the two, I thought this was done so brilliantly. I was moved by it, I laughed. There's songs that you can go and listen to on Spotify that kind of add to the whole experience. And I just thought this was a stunningly crafted novel. And I cannot wait to see what Bob the Drag Queen writes next, because I'll be reading whatever it is. I just thought this was that perfect pitch of poignancy and humour and bonkersness. And I just, really loved this. Then a book that I hated. Well, hate's a very strong word, but I couldn't finish it. This is Angie Kim's Happiness Falls. I'd heard amazing things about it. The cover, stunning. This is about a young woman whose one day her world is turned around when her stay-at-home dad goes out with her non-verbal brother and disappears, and Eugene, her brother, comes back in quite a state, and it's what follows on from there. And I've heard the author has done a lot of research into non-verbal conditions. However, it felt a bit like I was being manipulated and that this non-verbal condition was part of that. And it just went off on so many different tangents that sort of didn't make sense. It felt like it was trying to be a thriller that was introducing you to lots of facts around non-verbal communication, but in doing so I was wedging so much research into it, and also the narrator was just awful. The protagonist, I just didn't like her. So for me, it was an absolute no. So a shame, because I've been super duper excited about it. Then I read Dead Animals by Phoebe Stooks, because after Happiness Falls I wanted something short and sharp and that was going to stop me from going into a funk, because that almost caused one. And this definitely did the trick. It's about an unnamed narrator who goes to a party and she wakes up the next day covered in scratches and bruises, and it's kind of a revenge story as she befriends a woman called Helene. There's sort of an interesting tension between the two of them that adds to this possible revenge plot. It has some real supernatural shades to it that really unnerved me. I do remember feeling quite tense and occasionally a little bit scared by this book, both by this sort of supernatural edge but also by the psychology of the characters, that you didn't know quite what direction he was going to go. And it did get super duper dark. I think towards the end I wasn't really sure 100% what was going on, even though there is a very definite conclusion, but I don't want to spoil that. I definitely would read whatever Phoebe Stooks writes next. I think I just had super duper high hopes, especially because I think that cover is so brilliant and wanted something as unhinged as a cover, and it kind of is, but it's a little bit vague. However, not as vague as what I would say is my biggest disappointment of the year so far. It's Crystal Bamford's Idle Ground. Now I have to say, this sounded so up my street and I was so excited for this, and it's rare that I buy a hardback and head straight to it, but all the reviews are amazing of this family holiday in America in the, I want to say 60s or 70s. It's in the late 80s, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
My history from 1950 to about 1990 is dreadful. Worldwide.
So this is a novel set over, well, a few days of a summer holiday where a family have all got together and all the cousins are playing and they're watching something in the grounds of the garden that's like this dark shadow that's shifting here, there and everywhere, and it's really unsettling them, but they think maybe they should go and investigate. And one of the cousins does and vanishes, and then the rest of the cousins try to find them. I don't know what the hell happened after about the first quarter. None of it made sense to me. It was one of those books where it was supernatural and odd and otherly, but felt like it had no rules or no real concept of where it was going, and I was just being dragged at some points, frankly, along with it, and just not on board, but also weirdly couldn't stop reading it, but then by the end was just like nonplussed by the whole thing. So that's that. But ultimately in April I read Hum by Helen Phillips, which was a book that I decided to get to after having loved The Dream Hotel so much and wanting to read more speculative fiction. This is set in a not too distant future and is asking the question, what if AI was just in charge of everything? And in this world where that is the case, we meet May, who has not long lost her job. However, she's been paid to do something which means, well, a lot of things are, you're recognised by your thumb imprint and you can pay for everything and all that from your thumbprint, or it can be, or is it any of your fingers? But anyway, I digress. I'm going too much into the detail and I don't need to, I haven't got the time. You pay for things with your fingerprints, thumbprints, and also your face can be recognised, and she's been paid to have this procedure where her face is tweaked a bit and so she's no longer recognisable. And with the money that she gets from this, she decides to take all of her family to the Botanical Gardens, which is this retreat where, in a world that has become incredibly dirty, dusty, kind of rotten. In this world, for example, there are hums everywhere, which are these AI robots that are trying to help you but also trying to sell you stuff all the time. And then there are also these wombs that you can go into where they're like, basically it's as if you're on your phone but you're surrounded and cocooned, and that made me really think about how much I'm using my phone. But this world that she builds and the tensions in it and the way the plot goes along, I was just, yeah, absolutely smitten with this. I thought it was fantastic. I feel like I've made that sound too simple, and in some ways what's so genius about this is the simplicity of it, in the fact that she's created this super AI world that we're all thinking about right now, yet it's very much about a family within that and their own struggles and them going on a holiday that goes wrong, but it's also so much more than that. And I think that's kind of genius. So yeah, really, really, really loved that. And last but not least, in April, I read Stag Dance by Tori Peters. I was lucky enough to host Tori at the wonderful West Kirby bookshop, and she was just a joy. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, did I love this book. It's 5 novellas or long form fictions, the titular story being the longest. But what's incredible about this is each one of the stories is a different genre. So you have horror, you have one that is kind of a romance of sorts, you have the title story which is a western, you've also got one which is quite salacious, and then you have one that is dystopic, and each and every single one I thought was brilliant. I did particularly love Stag Dance, but I think that is because I'm getting more and more aware that I really like a western. I don't head to them that much, but when I do, I really, 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 really love them. I love the way that this book is all about gender, but it's also totally not about gender. What's also being about gender, what's also totally not being about gender, which will make sense if you've read it. Love is love, people are people, and lumberjacks are hot. I thought this was just brilliant, and I would love to reread this at some point, and I don't say that often. It's also made me want to reread Detransition Baby and go back to that. So there we are. Those are April's books. And so on to May, the penultimate month in this wild ride of a reading wrap-up video. I'm never leaving this long again. I promise I will get back to doing this monthly. Now, it will be a quick one, partly because Bert is too sexy and distracting, but also because I have talked about 12 of these books before. I started out May in Belfast, and so I read a book set there, and that was I Hear You, Paul McVeigh's latest book, which is a collection of short stories. I read Paul McVeigh's debut, The Good Son, and thought it was absolutely incredible. If you haven't read that, you should read it. This is also really, really good. It starts with 3 standalone stories, one about a man whose mother has Alzheimer's or dementia, which is incredibly moving, one that's called Cuckoo, which literally goes a little bit bonkers, and then also Daddy Christmas, which is about a gay man who has been kind of like a father figure to his friend who's a single mum's children, and she meets a new partner and it makes him think about the child that maybe he should have had, and I found that really, really moving. And then we moved to a series of stories all centering around the circus, which is a part of Belfast. It's not actually a literal circus, and we meet all of these different characters that centre around a talent show that's going on there. So we meet some of the people competing, we meet some of the people organising, and I thought it was just done so brilliantly. It does feel a bit like a sort of soap opera in short stories, and also kind of it's got the meatiness of a novel to it too when you combine them all. So yeah, I thought this was fab. Then on to the first shortlist selection of books that I read in May, and that was the International Booker Prize shortlist. I will link my video reading that down below, so we'll go through these very swiftly. First up we have Perfection by Vincenzo Latronico, translated by Sophie Hughes. This is about a millennial couple who are digital nomads living in Berlin. I enjoyed it at the time. It hasn't stayed with me that much, and actually I do look backward and sort of inwardly groan at the couple in question. So yeah, I thought this was a great read whilst I was reading it, but it has faded for me a little bit. Then we have Small Boat, which, blimey, this packs a punch, by Vincent Delacroix, translated by Helen Stevenson. And this is the story of a refugee boat that is out at sea and it comes into trouble. It's right in between Britain and France. They phone the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard doesn't really do anything, and we find out why and look at all of the questions that brings. But also this is a book that really holds a mirror to the reader and says, hang on a minute, what are you doing about this? You might be judging all of these people, be it that you're judging people fleeing their country, or be it you judging someone who doesn't do anything to help. But look at the situation. Are you complicit? Are you actually helping, or are you just standing by? What's going on? I thought that was brilliantly done. Then we have A Leopard Skin Hat by Anne Sir, translated by Mark Hutchinson, which is about a man who's looking back on the friendship that he had with a woman who has, well, she committed suicide, and the situation with her mental health in the lead up to that. It looks at the beauty of friendship, the fractures of friendship, the complexity of friendship, and the complexity of mental health. And whilst this wasn't a favourite of mine, it did linger with me, has lingered with me, and I do think about it quite a bit. Then we have, oh, I just love this book. We have On the Calculation of Volume 1 by Solva Barle, and oh, I really love this. I didn't actually think this was going to be a me book. It's about Tara, who finds herself waking up on the same day over and over. So when we meet her, it is the 120 something 18th of November, and then we go backwards to when the time sort of slip or repetition or Groundhog Day started, and up to the 125th, and then on, because she's hoping that after a year maybe something will change. Does it not? I'm not going to tell you. I loved the way that it looked at love and grief and aging, and what does time mean, and how time runs at different speeds for different people. Yeah, I just thought it was absolutely fantastic, an absolute favourite of the year. A surprise hit with me was Under the Eye of the Big Bird by Hiromi Kawakami. And this, I should say, is translated from the Japanese by Asa Yanida. When the long list for the International Booker Prize came out, this blurb intrigued me the most.
Because even though I always talk about how I ignore blurbs, I do go and look at blurbs of books that I haven't heard about when they're on prize lists.
This is set in an alternate future, possibly even a different world. That's kind of up for you to decide as it goes on. And we meet... Oh, it's really hard to try and do this succinctly. It's a very slow... confusing novel in a lot of ways, because we hear about almost different species that might be a bit human, they might not be, and we seem to be jumping around almost into different short stories. But the power of this book is that as you read along, reveals happen, and then by the end it all makes sense and you're like, blinking heck. But I don't want to spoil that for anyone. There was something in Hiromi's writing that kept me going, even though I was not really sure what the heck was going on. I still felt in real safe hands, so definitely need to read more of her work. And then last but not least was the winner, Heartlamp, selected stories by Banu Mushtaq, translated by Deepa Basti. And I still haven't finished the short story collection, and I think it's because the subject matter is quite intense, and I did feel like sometimes I was it felt a bit of a laborious task to get through. But because it won, I'm determined, because also I know Anton, her, and all the other judges really loved it. I really want to get it and to get it read. So I will carry on with this slowly but surely throughout this year. I might have to go back to the beginning, because I actually haven't picked this up since I put it down back in May. So yeah, we have that one. Then on to another shortlist, which was the shortlist for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction. I'm just going to say this from the off. This is one of the best shortlists for a prize ever. There we are. I've said it. I really, really, really loved this shortlist a lot. And Mum and I talked about it on her channel when we ranked the shortlist and predicted our winners. I'll link that video down below. So first up from the shortlist, I read What the Wild Sea Can Be, The Future of the World's Oceans by Helen Scales. I picked this up because I was a little bit nervous it might be really academic. That's what I'd kind of heard. And it wasn't as academic as I thought, although it definitely was in parts. I wanted a little bit more Helen, because when Helen kind of comes to the fore, the book comes alive. But this tells the history of our oceans, and she got me with the dinosaurs of the sea. Frankly, I was hooked. I love me a dinosaur. And we hear about all the different extinctions there have been and how we're currently in one, but this looks at what the hope is or possibilities are for the future. This book definitely drew me in and I enjoyed it, but sometimes I was like, oh, my brain isn't quite big enough. There was so much big brain energy, but I still really liked it. So yeah. Then we have The Story of a Heart by Rachel Clark, which won the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction this year. This is about two children, one called Kira, who sadly dies in a tragic accident, and whose heart is donated to Max, who is a really ill young boy. And we followed the story of their families. We followed the people who are part of the transplant and the NHS. Sorry, the swallows or swifts are going absolutely bonkers outside. We follow the staff in the NHS. We find out the history of transplants, and it is incredibly done. It made me cry within about 5 pages. It also, and this is just a me thing, I really struggle with blood and gore, and so this book made me go queasy at the knees quite a few times and a bit faint. So that did have an effect, but that's not the fault of the book. That's the fault of this queasy queer, frankly. So there we go. Then I read Raising Hair by Chloe Dalton, which is a story of Chloe moving to the countryside during the pandemic, and one day she rescues a leveret, a baby hare, and basically brings it into the house and rears it without becoming too close to it, although of course she does in some ways become quite close to it. I thought this was really, really lovely, and it brought back the nostalgia of when I had a duckling that imprinted on me. She was called Rapunzel, she was a legend. I just thought this was a really charming book, but also it has a political element to it because of the fact that hares are hunted any time of year, whereas other species are left alone during mating season, and she's trying to change that. So if the petition is still live, I'll link it down below so that you can put your name down to stop hares being hunted. Then we had Agent Zoe by Claire Mully. This is the story of Agent Zoe, who was an incredible woman who did so much for the war effort in Poland, and yeah, it's almost an unbelievable story, but also this is so brilliant and so Women's Prize in the fact that it's bringing the story of a woman who history seems to have forgotten back to the fore. It's an absolute thrilling romp, shocking in parts, but utterly gripping, and I can't recommend it enough. Then I read Private Revolutions by Yuan Yang, which I've been meaning to read ever since I got a proof of it last year. This is coming of age in a new China, and Yuan Yang follows 4 different women in China, all around the same age, but all coming from different class, different parts of the country, some from cities, some from rural life, and following them and finding out how China changing has been for those women who've lived through the changes from all those different walks of life. And I enjoyed this very much. I think I would have liked some of the voices to be a little bit different, but I thought the way it looked at the power of education was fantastic, and it's definitely a book that I would recommend. And last but not least was Naina Cherry's 1,000 Threads. Although not last of the books that I read in May, there's one more. This was my absolute favourite. This is Naina's memoir. I love Naina Cherry, but I was like, okay, celebrity memoir. But 1, it's so incredibly written. 2, it is so about life, and this book is all about culture and love and race and art and family and friendship, and it's just all the spectrum of life in one book. That's the only way I can really describe it, but just incredible. And yeah, love this a lot. But as I said, absolutely incredible shortlist. And then last but not least, in May, I read On the Calculation of Volume 2 by Solva Bala. And I can't really say anything more about this because that would possibly spoil On the Calculation of Volume 1, which I don't want to do. But I highly recommend you read both. I can't blink and wait for Volume 3.
4, 5, 6, or 7.
3 is coming out, funnily enough, on November the 18th, which I think is genius. So yeah, that was another corker, and that was May, and we're almost there. Well done, everyone. We have made it to June, and the last of my bookish catch-ups before, or bookish wrap-ups, before I head into monthly wrap-ups for the rest of the year and beyond, because I'm not doing this again. We got there, it's June, I've got my raspberry out. Anyway, let's get cracking on with the books. No more tangents, come on. So, first up in June, I read All Down Darkness Wide by Sean Hewitt, which is his memoir about being in a relationship with a partner who has severe depression. And this looks at that in such an unflinching way. It's sometimes really hard to read. I picked this for my Patreon book club, and when we were talking about it, we were saying that it's so raw in parts, you kind of have to look away or have breathers from it, but also it's so beautifully written, and the way it looks at the support that there is or isn't for people with mental health issues is done really honestly and unflinchingly, as is, and I don't think we talk about this as much as maybe we should, how that can affect all the people around that person, how sometimes that can affect their mental health. I thought this was just a really honest, unflinching, raw memoir that shows once again what an incredible writer Sean is. I love his poetry. I still haven't read his debut novel, Open Heaven. We were meant to do an event together in June, but it got cancelled, and because that's happened a few times in my career, I leave reading whatever I'm going to be doing for an event until really last minute. But I am looking forward to heading to it at some point in the second half of the year. But yeah, this was phenomenal, and everyone at Patreon Book Club absolutely loved it. What may well be, well, it depends if you call Stag Dance a short story collection or not, but this, if not, is my short story collection of the year so far. This is Vanessa Santos's Make a Home of Me. I picked this up at a train station bookshop and read it on the train afterwards in one big, dark, delicious, creepy go. What had made me drawn to it was the fact that it was a creepy sounding short story collection about odd dinner parties, people with strangely shy children. I could go on, but suffice to say, if you're after something that's really unhinged, unsettling and fantastic, then this is definitely for you. I often find with a short story collection there'll be a few that I'm not such a fan of, but I thought that pretty much every single one of these was a banger. So yeah, thrilled it was a random purchase because it made a 2.5-hour train journey absolutely fly by. Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. Another memoir which was a really kind of melancholic read for me because it's one of the naughtiest, most brilliant memoirs I've read, but I picked it up because sadly Edmund White, for it is his memoir, The Loves of My Life, passed away in June, which is what led me to getting to this, which I've meant to ever since it came out last year. This is, well, Cole put it brilliantly, I'll link Cole's channel down below, when he described it as being at a dinner with one of your naughtiest friends and they're telling you all the salacious gossip about basically their sex life. And I loved the way that this was told from a man later in life looking back, and just the unflinching joy of sharing his salacious stories. It's also, I should say, as well as being salacious and about sex and his sex life, a really fascinating look at queer history, or more recent queer history. And yeah, I just thought this was an absolute treat. But like I said, very sad in many ways because it's his last book. Then, oh, this was a good one as well. June was very good to me, I won't lie. We have Eowyn Ivy's Blackwood's Blue Sky, and I was very lucky because I got to interview Eowyn at Booker Bookshop in Oswestry, and we were reunited because I'd last interviewed her there 8 years ago for her second novel. So it had been a while and I was a bit nervous, like, would I love this as much as I'd loved her previous? This I thought was, again, wonderful. It's hard to say too much about this story. It's set in contemporary Alaska, where we meet Birdie, who's a young single mum who's going through a really difficult time and sort of looking for an escape in many ways. And she meets Arthur, who is kind of a bit of a loner, a bit adrift. He lives on the other side of the river from her, and there are kind of mutterings and murmurings about him, and we follow on from there. And this is a retelling of a fairy tale, but I don't want to tell you which fairy tale because that would spoil it, although it is kind of given away in the blurb and there's been a lot of press around it. But even if you do know what the fairy tale is, you still won't see what's coming, because as it goes on, there are some twists, and my jaw was dropped. I cried a lot and then left just giving the book a massive hug, and I can't wait for whatever Eowyn writes next. And also I'm now desperate to go out to Alaska, well, once the Orange Menace is gone. Moving on. After that I thought, oh no, I'm gonna have a really bad book hangover, so I need to read something that I'm pretty sure that I'm gonna kind of really enjoy. And when I last read this author, I didn't enjoy their work so much.
But having read this and loving it, after hearing so many amazing things about the books between this and that previous book of theirs that I've read.
Have we got overcomplicated enough? I don't know, maybe we haven't. I was a bit nervous about this one, I won't lie. However, I needn't have been, because boy oh boy, is this a corker. It is The Book of Guilt by Catherine Chidgey, which again is a book that I can't give too much away about, other than we meet Vincent, Lawrence, and I want to say William.
Oh, please let me have got that right.
Yes, I have. Who we meet in the 1970s. They're staying in a big old house in the New Forest, and they have a mother morning, a mother afternoon, and a mother night who look after them. As we read on, we realise this isn't quite the 1970s that we know, and something is definitely amiss. We also skip to two other narratives. One is to the Minister of Loneliness, a role that doesn't exist in government but does in this, and I'll say no more than that. And we meet a young girl called Nancy who is living with her parents in the suburbs. But as we get to learn more about her and her family, something seems really off. How do all of these link into each other? Do they all link into each other? Well, you will have to read to find out. Catherine Chidgey is brilliant at misguiding you, not in a playing games with you in a mean way, but in this really delightful way where you think you know what's going on and then you suddenly realise you don't. And she does that, or did that for me, all the way to the end. I thought this was absolutely brilliant, and another incredible speculative novel that I have read this year. It seems like 2025 is going to be the year of speculative fiction for me. I think this is speculative fiction because it's alternate, it's not dystopic. But yeah, I absolutely love this, and it's made me want to reread Remote Sympathy to see if it was right book, wrong time. But also I'm now desperate to get to the Axeman's Carnival and also Pet, so I will be doing at some point. But yeah, that was brilliant. And penultimately for this video, and indeed for June, I read Room 706 by Ellie Levinson, which is actually coming out next year. I don't have any space on my shelves for 2026 books yet,
because I need to have a real sort out of some of the problem areas in my library, which I think I'm going to do a whole video on.
So I was like, right, well, got to read it then. Another book here that I can't say too much about, so I'll just give you the initial premise, which is that we meet Kate, who is happily married, a mother of two, and she's having an affair with a happily married man. And this has been going on for quite some time. However, on this one specific day when they're staying at room 706, the hotel is taken over. And so the hotel is suddenly major news, and well, et it up. That's all I'll say. And then last but certainly not least, well, I say that as a book, kind of not one of my favourites of the year, but I buddy read this with the lovely aforementioned Cole, and that was such a treat. And this is a perfect book to read with someone else or a book club, because you'll just get a lot of discussion out of it. It is Henry by Alan Bratton. This is a retelling of Shakespeare's The Henriad, but in 2014 London. The buddy read was fantastic. However, I found this a bit of a mess of a debut. This is about Henry, who is a young rich kid who is going to inherit land and a title. He's openly gay, which has upset everyone. Then, well, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but he meets someone, they sort of try and change him. They're also a bit odious in some ways. And we also find out, trigger warning, that Henry is going through a very abusive relationship, an incestuous relationship with his father. And we also get this background about his father's relationship with a man called Richard, and also William, and I think there's somebody else who I can't remember who's a bit kingly. And that story, actually, when you get that sort of very much info dumped at the end, I thought would have been a better novel. There's some really interesting stuff around mirroring, and also I felt around the sort of myth of Narcissus in here. But yeah, I am very conflicted by it, in the fact that, like I said, absolutely loved reading it with Cole, but didn't absolutely love the book, and probably would have DNF'd it if I hadn't been buddy reading it. A messy debut with some pleasing moments and lots of icky moments. I'm thrilled that me and Cole did it, and I can't wait to do another buddy read with him. Blimey, we've made it. We are wrapped up. I hope you enjoyed this. If you got to the end of this video, very, very, very well done. Hope you're all doing super duper well. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like more savage shenanigans before the next one,
Not sure when it'll be, and you might want to break from me after this epic.
my Instagram, my Blue Sky, Patreon wishes, all those things are down below. Thank you for watching. Let's keep chatting about these books in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts on them, and I will see you in another video very, very soon. Bye. I can't believe there's not a raspberry emoji. I could go on about this for years.